but we decide to present more the contemplative side of our tradition, but always with the Afro-Cuban roots underneath.
More like subdued kind of Afro-Cuban music than what that kind of style is associated with, especially in the States.
Well, Afro-Cuban music is the backbone of my life, not only my music. I'm a religion person. I'm a santero. I'm a part of the Afro-Cuban, the Lucumí tradition. So for me, everything in a way is related with the connection between the ancestors and our elders, and the legacy. And this is one non-stop work. Every day I do some new resource about how our tradition of right to a point it became kind of popular in the whole world. And in that case, I need to go to Africa, I need to go to Middle East, and our roots come from there, and actually from Europe, because it's a syncretism of all this tradition together, and now it's come out Afro-Cuban tradition and actually Afro-Cuban music.
Wow. So I know you also spent some time in Ecuador in the 90s. Can you talk a bit about
Oh yeah.
how that affected your music?
Well, this is another this is another interesting moment in my life, because I discovered the Pacific Coast music when the boat brought the slaves there, but they never was a slave. They was like we call in Cuba negros libertos, it's free black men, and I learned this music with them, and the connection with the Afro-Cuban music was really really close. So basically, we all come from the same mother, Africa. And when you listen to marimba esmeraldeña and all this kind of currulao, all these rhythms, you can find some relation with the Afro-Cuban tradition.
What is your compositional process like? Like when you sit down and compose a song, what do you think about?
Well, it's kind of all over the place. I have to be honest, because I've written very few pieces at the vibraphone. I usually compose at the piano. And, it depends on the project, because I've had so many different bands, so many different groups. I have a Norwegian band, which is called Northern Lights. So when I'm writing for the Norwegians, and I play with quite a few Norwegian musicians when I'm in Norway and when I'm in Scandinavia. And their approach is, I'm sure you're familiar with Jan Garabek and the work, say, Keith Jarrett has done over the years with Norwegian Scandinavian musicians. Their approach is more folk-like. The improvisation is much different than ours, although they can play American, let's say, straight-ahead jazz, but their music is much more open. So if I'm writing something for that particular band and that particular project, I'm thinking, taking some of the folk music that my roots, my playing was Tim Hardin and McLean and Janice Ian, my work with Carly Simon, all of the folk musicians that I worked with, and my experience up in Woodstock, because I lived there for almost 25 years, raised 7 out of my 8 children in Woodstock. So I was surrounded by that, by quite a few folk musicians, and the music is it's part of my soul. So there's a connection between our folk music and Norwegian folk music. And so I'll sit down at the piano and I'll try to put myself in that setting, just bring bring that to the forefront, as opposed to just sitting down trying to play something that's more like fusion or jazz. Um, so if it's, to answer your question, it really depends on the project, and and that's my approach. I don't really use a computer that much. The music programs. I still pretty much, although I can, pretty much I write by hand.
That's interesting how you talk about your folk influence, because a lot of times people think that folk and jazz are two separate genres that don't mix a lot. And that's very cool how you have a folk melody when you think of in folk terms when you're trying to write a melody for those Swedish musicians, as you said in that example. Now, I was going to ask you about one song in particular, because this is one of your songs that I think has really almost taken on a life of its own. Your song Self-Portrait off your second Steps Ahead album that was released in the US, Modern Times. I've seen it covered by all sorts of ensembles, like solo acoustic, like bass ensembles. It's really taken on a life of its own. Can you describe that one song in particular, how you composed it?
Yeah, I mean, that's really folky. I mean, if I were to play that to you on the guitar, just a guitar, like an acoustic guitar, or on the piano, it would be pretty much folk-like. It's that and another song called Sarah's Touch. I don't know if you've heard that one, but that's been covered quite a few times. So they were normally if I was just a straight ahead jazz bebop player and composer, I don't think I'd write a song that would utilize those chords and that melody. It's a little melancholy, I think, the melody. So it was great that the musicians that I was playing with at the time, with Steps Ahead, were also exposed to a lot of folk music. They played on a lot of albums, folk musicians, and I think Warren Bernhardt appears on this particular tune. And Warren and I both lived in Woodstock, and he actually was instrumental in introducing me to Tim Hardin back in the early 60s, and we both played with Tim Hardin. I don't know if you know who he is. He was a great folk singer and composer. So we played with Timmy, and Tim introduced us to that world, and we actually all moved up to Woodstock. A lot of the jazz musicians moved up to Woodstock because of people like Dylan and Tim Hardin, who had moved up there in the 60s. And the environment up there was incredible, because you had jazz musicians that lived up there, like Dave Holland, Carla Bley, Jack DeJohnette. Jack still lives in Woodstock. Wow. And of course Dylan, Bob is up there, and John Sebastian. I mean, so many, I can't think of all the names, but yeah, there's a tremendous community of maybe 200-300 artists living in this very small village and performing at a local club. So our children grew up together. We're all friends. It was the 60s. It was the 70s. So it was like a commune in a lot of ways. So the music was very eclectic. But getting back to this particular piece, I just think of it as a folk song. There's very little improvisation on it. As a matter of fact, I don't think Michael Brecker even plays a solo on it. When we used to play live, we would extend the ending, and Michael would play on the ending for play a solo. But on the record itself, I don't think he played a solo on it. I don't think anybody played a solo except I think it was just a vibraphone solo.
He was just straight. So I wanted to...
But listen to the intro with Warren Bernhardt. It was an amazing pianist, both jazz and classical, but a great folk musician, keyboard player. But his introduction, which was totally improvised, and you could just hear the influence of Tim Hardin and a lot of the folk musicians that both Warren and I played with throughout the many years.
Now, I wanted to play a cover of Self Portrait by the solo
Ah,
acoustic guitar version. I think this is one of like the better arrangements of it I've heard, because even though the original recording is like a 5-6 person band, it translates incredibly well to a solo instrument just because of the strength of the melody and harmony.
I wonder who this is. Who is it?
Don Ross,
Ah,
very very fantastic Canadian guitar player. He's one of the real founders of the new wave of fingerstyle acoustic guitarists out there.
oh, I'm anxious to hear this. That was beautiful. You've really done your homework. How did you find that piece? I'd never heard it myself. It was really a joy to hear. I'm curious if he retuned the guitar, because I think he didn't play it in the original key.
He
He,
he did use an altered tuning. I can't remember off the top of my head what it was. Now, for finding that song out, that was actually how I found Steps Ahead in Your Music, was through Don Ross's version of that song. Because I'm
that's
an acoustic guitarist myself, so I listen to a lot of solo acoustic guitar, and I'm a big fan of Don's stuff. And I listened to that album, and I really enjoyed that song. At first, I didn't know it was a cover. I thought it was his original. Then I looked back, and I found that it was a cover of one of your pieces, and then I checked out your work based on that.
well, it works that way sometimes, you know. Somebody will hear me on I don't know, like a Dire Straits album or something like that, and they'll sort of like trace it back and become fans of Steps Ahead, which is wonderful, you know.
That's probably one of the big benefits of you playing with so many people, is that kind of one musician I've interviewed, Omar Sosa, talked about how he uses music to connect different aspects of the African diaspora. And you connect with a lot of different cultures with your own music, with your collaborations with Sandor Sasbo, as well as Balsas Major, because they're both Hungarian musicians, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm. So, like,
Yeah.
how did you first get in touch with them? And was there any sort of cultural barrier when you guys started playing together?
Not a cultural barrier. Chandor is very fluent in English. Balázs speaks maybe 2 or 3 words of English, and I speak maybe 2 or 3 words of Hungarian. So we don't communicate verbally, but we are absolutely locked in together artistically.
What originally drew you to jazz music? Because I know you're also classically trained.
Yeah, that's what I studied. I'm a classical musician. I'm actually a choir conductor. I didn't choose jazz like in the proper way because I didn't know even what it was. But in my school, in my conservatory, they had a big band, and they were looking for a singer. So they asked me to join them in this project, and I started singing jazz without the knowledge about it. I didn't know that I was actually singing jazz. And when I realized what I was doing, I was already I was in love with the project. I was in love with the big band and with the music that we were playing. So I said to myself, you know what, this is what I want to do. So thanks God we had that big band at the school. Otherwise, I was being like conducting a choir, singing Bach or Mozart.
I was also wondering, so you sing in multiple languages. I know you have songs in English, Spanish, French, Yoruba. How come?
Yeah, but I don't speak any of those. I don't speak French at all, and I don't speak Yoruba. Actually, I wrote songs in Portuguese too, and I don't speak Portuguese because sometimes the music. I'm a musical person, so normally I get the music first, and the lyrics come later. And sometimes when I'm writing the music, I scat the melody. So that scat tells me which language should be right in the song, and then I get people to help me. No, normally I go to find out in Google like ideas to try to translate them in French or in Portuguese, and then I get people to help me to see if I did it right or not. But I don't speak French or Portuguese or Yoruba, at all.